Question 1. Benchmark analysis indicates that drivers operating on the roads of Hawke's Bay must consistently prioritize safety. If a driver observes a distressed child in another vehicle that appears to be experiencing a mechanical issue, what is the most professionally responsible course of action according to New Zealand road user regulations? Option A. Ignore the child's distress and continue driving without any attempt to assess the situation. Option B. Immediately stop the vehicle in the traffic lane to offer immediate assistance to the child. Option C. Safely pull over to the side of the road, away from traffic, and then assess the situation to determine if assistance is needed. Option D. Continue driving at the normal speed while attempting to comfort or assist the child. The correct answer is C. Safely pull over to the side of the road, away from traffic, and then assess the situation to determine if assistance is needed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the driver to make an immediate decision under pressure, balancing personal urgency with the paramount importance of road safety and adherence to traffic laws. The presence of a child in distress, while emotionally compelling, does not override the fundamental legal and ethical obligations of a driver to operate their vehicle safely and responsibly. Misjudging the situation could lead to a serious accident, endangering the driver, the child, and other road users. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing immediate safety and legal compliance. This means safely pulling over to the side of the road, away from traffic, and then assessing the situation. Once safely stopped, the driver can then attend to the child's needs, which may include offering assistance or contacting emergency services if necessary. This approach is correct because it adheres to the New Zealand Land Transport, Road User, Rule 2004, which mandates that drivers must drive in a way that does not cause danger to any other person. It also aligns with the ethical responsibility of all road users to maintain a safe environment. By stopping safely, the driver mitigates the risk of an accident caused by distraction or sudden maneuvers, and then can address the child's situation without compromising road safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately stopping the vehicle in a traffic lane to attend to the child. This is professionally unacceptable as it creates an immediate and significant hazard to other road users, potentially causing a collision. It directly violates the principle of not causing danger to any other person, as stipulated by the Land Transport, Road User, Rule 2004. Another incorrect approach is to continue driving at the normal speed while attempting to comfort or assist the child. This is dangerous and unprofessional because it divides the driver's attention, significantly increasing the risk of an accident. The primary responsibility of a driver is to operate the vehicle safely, and this approach compromises that responsibility, potentially leading to a breach of the duty of care owed to other road users. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the child's distress and continue driving without any attempt to assess the situation. While this might seem to prioritize immediate traffic flow, it fails to address a potential emergency and demonstrates a lack of civic responsibility and empathy. While not directly causing a traffic hazard, it misses an opportunity to provide necessary assistance and could be seen as a failure of basic human decency, which, while not a direct traffic law violation, is a component of professional conduct expected of all citizens. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field, including driving, must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legality, and ethical considerations. In this context, the framework involves 1. Immediate risk assessment. Evaluate the immediate danger to oneself and others. 2. Legal compliance. Determine the actions that are permissible and required by law. 3. Ethical responsibility. Consider the moral obligation to assist others when possible without compromising safety or legality. 4. Graduated response. Implement a response that escalates appropriately based on the assessment, starting with the safest and most legally compliant action. In this case, safely stopping is the initial and most critical step. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a new driver being overly confident after completing a few practice sessions. Considering the requirements for the Hawke's Bay driver's test in New Zealand, which approach best ensures the applicant demonstrates genuine competency and road safety awareness before being granted a license? Option A. The supervisor allows the applicant to bypass certain complex driving scenarios if they have demonstrated proficiency in other areas, assuming they will learn these aspects with more experience. Option B. The supervisor passes the applicant despite minor instances of rule breaking or unsafe driving, believing these are insignificant and will be corrected with time. Option C. The supervisor relies on their familiarity with the applicant's driving from previous practice sessions to gauge their readiness, rather than focusing solely on the test performance. Option D. The supervisor meticulously observes the applicant's driving throughout the entire test, assessing their adherence to all road rules, defensive driving skills, and vehicle control in diverse conditions, ensuring they meet the competency standards outlined in the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. The correct answer is D. The supervisor meticulously observes the applicant's driving throughout the entire test, assessing their adherence to all road rules, defensive driving skills, and vehicle control in diverse conditions, ensuring they meet the competency standards outlined in the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the paramount importance of road safety and adherence to the New Zealand Land Transport Act 1998 and associated Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. A new driver's inexperience, coupled with potential pressure from family or friends, creates a situation where a supervisor might be tempted to overlook minor infringements or inadequacies to expedite the process. However, the supervisor's responsibility is to ensure the applicant is genuinely competent and safe to drive unsupervised, a duty that supersedes personal convenience or external pressure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the supervisor diligently observing the applicant's driving performance throughout the entire test duration, specifically noting their ability to adhere to all road rules, demonstrate defensive driving techniques, and maintain control of the vehicle in various traffic conditions. This approach aligns directly with the objectives of the Hawke's Bay driver's test, which is designed to assess a driver's readiness for unsupervised driving under the New Zealand regulatory framework. The supervisor must ensure the applicant meets the competency standards set out in the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which mandates a thorough assessment of practical driving skills and knowledge. Any deviation from these standards, even if seemingly minor, could compromise road safety and violate the supervisor's professional and legal obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the supervisor allowing the applicant to skip certain challenging maneuvers or traffic situations because they appear to be progressing well overall. This fails to adequately assess the applicant's competency in all required areas as stipulated by the testing criteria, potentially leading to a license being issued to someone not fully prepared for all driving scenarios. This contravenes the spirit and letter of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which requires a comprehensive evaluation. Another incorrect approach is for the supervisor to rely heavily on their prior knowledge of the applicant's driving habits from supervised practice sessions, rather than objectively assessing their performance during the actual test. While prior knowledge can be helpful, the test itself is the definitive evaluation. Over-reliance on past observations can lead to overlooking current test day performance issues, which is a failure to conduct a proper assessment as required by the testing protocols. A further incorrect approach is for the supervisor to pass the applicant despite clear evidence of rule-breaking or unsafe driving practices, rationalizing that these were minor errors or that the applicant was just momentarily distracted. This directly undermines the purpose of the driver licensing system, which is to ensure only competent and safe drivers are on the road. Such an action would be a serious breach of the supervisor's duty of care and a violation of the Land Transport Act 1998, which prioritizes public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance above all else. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Hawke's Bay driver's test and the underlying legislation, Land Transport Act 1998 and Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. When faced with borderline situations or pressure, professionals should refer back to the objective testing criteria and the core principle of ensuring public safety. They should document all observations thoroughly and make decisions based on evidence of competency or lack thereof, rather than subjective feelings or external influences. If in doubt about an applicant's readiness, The professional decision is always to err on the side of caution and require further practice or retesting. Question 3. The risk matrix shows a potential hazard related to driver fatigue for a commercial transport operator in Hawke's Bay. A driver reports feeling increasingly tired during a long-haul journey, but states they are still within their legally permitted driving hours as per New Zealand regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the transport operator to ensure compliance and safety? Option A. Immediately instruct the driver to take a mandatory rest break, assess their fitness to drive upon resumption, and document the incident and action taken. Option B. Advise the driver to continue driving, reminding them that they are within their legal driving hours, and to report if their condition significantly worsens. Option C. Suggest the driver pull over at the next available service station for a short nap, without formal documentation or further assessment of their fitness to drive. Option D. Instruct the driver to push through the fatigue, as meeting delivery schedules is critical for the business's profitability. The correct answer is A. Immediately instruct the driver to take a mandatory rest break, assess their fitness to drive upon resumption, and document the incident and action taken. Explanation: the risk matrix shows a potential hazard related to driver fatigue, which is a significant safety concern on Hawke's Bay roads. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the paramount duty of ensuring public safety and compliance with New Zealand's Land Transport Act 1998 and associated regulations concerning driver hours and fatigue management. A driver's well-being directly impacts their ability to operate a vehicle safely, and failing to address fatigue can lead to serious accidents. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying and mitigating fatigue risks. This includes implementing a robust fatigue management system that monitors driver hours, schedules adequate rest breaks, and provides clear protocols for drivers to report symptoms of fatigue without fear of reprisal. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect life and prevent harm, and the legal requirement under the Land Transport Act to ensure vehicles are operated safely. Specifically, the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015 also places a duty on persons conducting a business or undertaking to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health and safety of workers and other persons. Proactive monitoring and intervention are key to fulfilling these duties. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss a driver's report of fatigue based on the assumption that they are still within their legal driving hours. This fails to acknowledge that fatigue is subjective and can impair judgment and reaction times even before legal limits are reached. It also creates a culture where drivers may feel pressured to drive while tired, violating the ethical duty of care and potentially breaching the Land Transport Act's intent regarding safe operation. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the driver self-reporting fatigue without any independent verification or system support. While self-reporting is crucial, it should be part of a broader system that includes checks and balances. Without this, the responsibility is placed entirely on the driver, and the organization may not be fulfilling its duty of care to ensure a safe working environment. This can lead to breaches of both ethical and legal obligations. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to implement a policy that penalizes drivers for reporting fatigue. This directly discourages reporting, creating a significant safety risk and a toxic work environment. It is ethically reprehensible and legally unsound, as it undermines the very purpose of fatigue management regulations and puts the public at undue risk. The professional decision-making process should involve a risk-based approach, prioritizing safety above all else. This means establishing clear policies and procedures for fatigue management, providing training to drivers and supervisors, utilizing technology to monitor driving hours and rest periods, and fostering an open communication culture where fatigue can be reported and addressed without negative consequences. When a potential fatigue issue arises, the immediate priority is to remove the driver from duty until they are fit to drive, regardless of schedules or deadlines. Question 4. The efficiency study reveals a significant increase in reported near-miss incidents on rural Hawke's Bay roads. Considering the specific context of Hawke's Bay's road network and driver demographics, which of the following strategies would best address this trend? Option A. Conduct a detailed analysis of near-miss data, correlating it with specific road characteristics, traffic volumes, and weather conditions in Hawke's Bay, and consult with local road safety officers to identify common contributing factors before proposing targeted interventions. Option B. Immediately implement a campaign to increase driver reporting of near misses, assuming the rise is due to greater awareness rather than an actual increase in hazardous situations. Option C. Install additional warning signs at all rural intersections and curves across Hawke's Bay, regardless of specific incident data. Option D. Propose a uniform reduction in speed limits on all rural roads in Hawke's Bay, where near misses have been reported. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed analysis of near-miss data, correlating it with specific road characteristics, traffic volumes, and weather conditions in Hawke's Bay, and consult with local road safety officers to identify common contributing factors before proposing targeted interventions. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a significant increase in reported near-miss incidents on rural Hawke's Bay roads. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of road safety principles and the specific context of Hawke's Bay, balancing the need for immediate action with thorough investigation. Careful judgment is required to identify the root causes and implement effective preventative measures without causing undue disruption or misallocating resources. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the near-miss data, correlating it with specific road conditions, traffic patterns, and driver behavior observed in Hawke's Bay. This includes consulting with local road safety experts and potentially conducting on-site assessments of high-incident locations. The justification for this approach lies in its adherence to best practices in accident prevention, which emphasize data-driven analysis and a holistic understanding of contributing factors. This aligns with the general principles of road safety management, aiming to identify systemic issues rather than isolated events. An approach that focuses solely on increasing signage without a detailed analysis of the near misses is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the underlying causes of the incidents, which may be related to road design, driver fatigue, or specific traffic management issues unique to Hawke's Bay. It represents a superficial solution that is unlikely to yield lasting improvements and could lead to driver complacency with excessive signage. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to dismiss the increase in near misses as a result of increased driver reporting, without any investigation. This ignores the potential for genuine safety concerns and fails to uphold the professional responsibility to investigate and mitigate risks. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the safety of road users in Hawke's Bay. Finally, implementing immediate, drastic speed limit reductions across all affected rural roads without a detailed analysis of each location's specific risks is also professionally unsound. While speed is a factor in accidents, a blanket reduction may not be appropriate for all situations and could negatively impact traffic flow and driver perception of safety. A targeted, evidence-based approach is crucial. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data collection and analysis, followed by targeted interventions. This involves understanding the specific context of the Hawke's Bay region, consulting relevant local authorities and stakeholders, and implementing solutions that are proportionate to the identified risks. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of implemented measures are also essential to ensure their effectiveness. Question 5. The risk matrix shows a potential issue with the braking system of a vehicle presented for a Hawke's Bay driver's license test. The applicant insists the brakes are just a bit soft and that they can still stop the vehicle. What is the most appropriate course of action for the testing officer? Option A. Ask the applicant to demonstrate an emergency stop to assess the braking performance, and if it appears adequate, continue with the test. Option B. Proceed with the test but make a note of the braking issue, advising the applicant to get it checked after the test. Option C. Suggest the applicant try pumping the brakes before starting the test to see if that improves their feel, and then proceed if they feel it is sufficient. Option D. Immediately cease the test and inform the applicant that the vehicle is not roadworthy for testing purposes due to the braking system concern, requiring the issue to be rectified before a new test can be scheduled. The correct answer is D. Immediately cease the test and inform the applicant that the vehicle is not roadworthy for testing purposes due to the braking system concern, requiring the issue to be rectified before a new test can be scheduled. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential hazard identified during a routine pre-drive inspection for a Hawke's Bay driver's license applicant. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the applicant's desire to proceed with the test against the immediate safety implications of a potentially compromised vehicle. A careful judgment is required to ensure public safety without being overly punitive or dismissive of the applicant's efforts. The best professional practice involves prioritizing safety and adherence to the land transport rule. Vehicle equipment. This approach involves stopping the test immediately and explaining to the applicant that the vehicle's condition poses a significant safety risk, rendering it unsuitable for the test. The examiner must clearly articulate that the test cannot proceed until the identified issue is rectified and the vehicle is deemed roadworthy. This aligns with the fundamental ethical obligation of the examiner to uphold road safety standards and prevent potentially dangerous vehicles from being licensed. It also directly addresses the regulatory requirement that vehicles used for testing must meet minimum safety standards. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the test despite the identified hazard. This fails to uphold the examiner's duty of care and directly contravenes the spirit and letter of road safety regulations. Allowing a potentially unsafe vehicle onto the road, even for a test, increases the risk of an accident, jeopardizing the applicant, the examiner, and other road users. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the applicant's concern about the vehicle's condition without proper investigation, assuming it is a minor issue. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to take potential safety concerns seriously. It could lead to a dangerous situation if the issue is indeed significant. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to offer to work around the issue or to suggest the applicant ignore it for the purpose of the test. This is ethically unsound and legally indefensible, as it implies condoning unsafe driving practices and potentially overlooking a critical defect that could lead to a breakdown or accident. The professional reasoning process for such situations involves a clear hierarchy of priorities: safety first, then regulatory compliance, and finally, fairness to the applicant. Examiners should be trained to identify potential safety issues, understand the relevant regulations regarding vehicle roadworthiness, and possess the communication skills to explain their decisions clearly and respectfully to applicants. When in doubt, erring on the side of caution and prioritizing safety is always the correct professional decision. Question 6. The risk matrix highlights a potential issue identified with a vehicle's braking system during a standard inspection in Hawke's Bay. Considering the New Zealand Land Transport Rule, NZLTR, and the inspector's duty of care, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate professional response? Option A. Conduct a detailed assessment of the braking system's performance against the minimum safety standards stipulated in the NZLTR, and if a safety-critical defect is found, issue a defect notice and advise on the necessary rectification steps according to the rule. Option B. Issue a warning to the driver about the potential issue and allow them to continue operating the vehicle, assuming the defect is minor and unlikely to cause immediate danger. Option C. Suggest to the driver that they might be able to temporarily adjust the braking system themselves to pass the inspection, or recommend a specific mechanic known for getting vehicles through. Option D. Immediately declare the vehicle unroadworthy and require it to be towed away, regardless of the specific nature or severity of the braking system defect. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed assessment of the braking system's performance against the minimum safety standards stipulated in the NZLTR, and if a safety-critical defect is found, issue a defect notice and advise on the necessary rectification steps according to the rule. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential hazard identified during a routine inspection of a vehicle's braking system in Hawke's Bay. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the inspector to balance the immediate need for road safety with the driver's right to operate their vehicle and the potential economic impact of a failed inspection. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action based on the severity of the identified issue and the relevant New Zealand Land Transport Rule, NZLTR, provisions. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the braking system's condition against the minimum safety standards outlined in the NZLTR. This approach prioritizes public safety by ensuring that vehicles on Hawke's Bay roads meet the required safety specifications. If the braking system is found to be deficient to a degree that poses an immediate safety risk, the inspector must follow the prescribed procedures for issuing a defect notice and potentially preventing the vehicle's immediate use until rectified, as mandated by the NZLTR. This ensures compliance with legal obligations and upholds the ethical duty to protect road users. An approach that involves overlooking a minor defect to avoid inconvenience to the driver is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the inspector's duty of care and contravenes the NZLTR, which requires all safety standards to be met. Similarly, immediately deeming the vehicle unroadworthy without a detailed assessment of the specific defect and its impact on braking performance is an overreaction and may not be justified by the NZLTR. This could lead to unnecessary disruption and potential disputes. Finally, advising the driver on how to circumvent the inspection process or suggesting temporary, non-compliant fixes would be a severe ethical and regulatory breach, undermining the integrity of the entire vehicle inspection system and jeopardizing public safety. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific requirements of the NZLTR. This involves clearly identifying the nature and severity of the defect, assessing its direct impact on the vehicle's safe operation, and then applying the relevant rules to determine the appropriate action. Documentation of the findings and the rationale for the decision is crucial for accountability and transparency. Question 7. The risk matrix shows a moderate risk identified with a vehicle's braking system during a routine inspection in Hawke's Bay, indicating a potential for gradual degradation of performance. What is the most appropriate course of action for the inspector? Option A. Immediately fail the vehicle for the braking system defect, requiring immediate repair before it can be legally driven. Option B. Suggest the driver ignore the defect for now and monitor it, as it is unlikely to cause significant issues in the short term. Option C. Document the defect, clearly explain the potential safety implications and the need for repair within a specified time frame to the driver, and advise on the process for reinspection. Option D. Advise the driver that the defect is minor and no immediate action is required, as it does not present an immediate safety hazard. The correct answer is C. Document the defect, clearly explain the potential safety implications and the need for repair within a specified time frame to the driver, and advise on the process for reinspection. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential hazard identified during a routine inspection of a vehicle's braking system in Hawke's Bay. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action when a defect is found that, while not immediately critical, could degrade over time and compromise safety. This requires balancing the immediate need for roadworthiness with the practicalities of vehicle ownership and repair scheduling. The regulatory framework in New Zealand, specifically the Land Transport Rule, Vehicle Standards Compliance 2002, mandates that vehicles must be maintained in a safe condition. The best professional approach involves accurately assessing the severity of the braking system defect and advising the driver of the potential risks and necessary remedial actions. This includes clearly communicating the nature of the defect, the potential consequences if left unaddressed, e.g., reduced braking efficiency, increased stopping distances, and the time frame within which repairs should be completed to maintain compliance with road safety standards. This aligns with the ethical obligation to promote road safety and the legal requirement to ensure vehicles meet the prescribed standards. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the defect as minor without further assessment, potentially leading to a false sense of security for the driver and a delayed repair. This fails to uphold the duty of care to ensure vehicle safety and could contravene the Land Transport Rule by allowing a vehicle to operate with a defect that compromises its roadworthiness. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately fail the vehicle for a defect that does not present an immediate danger, without providing clear guidance on the required repairs and a reasonable time frame for rectification. This could be seen as overly punitive and not in line with a graduated approach to enforcement that prioritizes safety while allowing for practical repair solutions. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that involves thorough inspection, accurate classification of the defect based on established criteria, clear and constructive communication with the vehicle owner, and adherence to regulatory guidelines for rectification and reinspection. This ensures a focus on achieving and maintaining road safety. Question 8. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for a Hawke's Bay driver's license has made several minor errors during their practical test, such as slight hesitations at intersections and minor steering adjustments. However, they have demonstrated a strong theoretical understanding of road rules and hazard perception. Considering the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, what is the most appropriate course of action for the testing officer? Option A. Conduct a focused review of the observed minor errors, assessing if they indicate a potential underlying issue with safe driving practices or hazard management, and provide specific feedback on these areas. Option B. Require the candidate to retake the entire theoretical knowledge test to confirm their understanding of road rules. Option C. Fail the candidate due to the presence of any errors, regardless of their severity, to maintain the highest possible standard. Option D. Immediately pass the candidate, as their strong theoretical knowledge suggests they are competent to drive safely. The correct answer is A. Conduct a focused review of the observed minor errors, assessing if they indicate a potential underlying issue with safe driving practices or hazard management, and provide specific feedback on these areas. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in driver testing, balancing efficiency with thoroughness to ensure road safety. In Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017, administered by the NZ Transport Agency, NZTA, mandates specific competencies for driver licensing. The professional challenge lies in identifying and addressing potential gaps in a candidate's understanding or application of safe driving practices without unduly prolonging the assessment or creating an unfair experience. This requires a nuanced approach that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. The best approach involves a structured review of the candidate's performance against the official Hawke's Bay driver's test syllabus, specifically looking for patterns of errors or areas where fundamental safety principles might be misunderstood. This systematic evaluation allows for targeted feedback and, if necessary, further assessment to confirm competency. This aligns with the NZTA objective of ensuring all licensed drivers possess the necessary skills and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely on New Zealand roads. It upholds the ethical responsibility of the testing officer to protect public safety by not licensing individuals who may pose a risk. An approach that focuses solely on the number of minor errors, without considering their nature or potential impact on safety, is flawed. Minor errors, if isolated and not indicative of a deeper misunderstanding of critical safety procedures, may not warrant immediate failure or extensive retesting. Conversely, a single serious error, even if isolated, could demonstrate a significant safety risk. Another unacceptable approach is to assume a candidate's understanding based on their ability to recall theoretical knowledge without observing practical application. The Hawke's Bay driver's test is designed to assess practical driving skills and judgment in real-world scenarios, not just theoretical recall. Failure to observe practical application means the assessment may not accurately reflect the candidate's ability to drive safely. Finally, an approach that prioritizes completing the test quickly over ensuring all critical competencies are met is professionally negligent. The primary objective of the driver licensing process is public safety, and this must take precedence over administrative efficiency. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific requirements of the Hawke's Bay driver's test syllabus and the Land Transport Driver Licensing Rule 2017. They should then objectively assess the candidate's performance, categorizing errors by severity and potential safety impact. This assessment should inform a decision on whether the candidate has demonstrated the required competencies for safe driving. If there are doubts, targeted follow-up or further assessment is warranted, always prioritizing the safety of all road users. Question 9. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for a Hawke's Bay driver's license has demonstrated generally competent driving throughout their practical test, but has made one significant error by failing to yield at a controlled intersection, which was observed by the examiner. Considering the Land Transport Rule, Driver Licensing 2007, which of the following approaches best reflects the examiner's professional responsibility? Option A. The examiner should meticulously document the failure to yield, assess its potential impact on safety, and make a decision on passing or failing based on the cumulative evidence and the severity of the error in relation to the overall assessment criteria. Option B. The examiner should overlook the single failure to yield, assuming it was a momentary lapse, and pass the candidate to maintain testing efficiency and avoid delaying their licensing process. Option C. The examiner should focus on the fact that only one significant error occurred and pass the candidate, as the rule primarily concerns the number of errors rather than their individual severity. Option D. The examiner should pass the candidate based on their overall positive driving impression, considering the single error as minor and not indicative of a broader lack of skill. The correct answer is A. The examiner should meticulously document the failure to yield, assess its potential impact on safety, and make a decision on passing or failing based on the cumulative evidence and the severity of the error in relation to the overall assessment criteria. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in driver testing, balancing efficiency with thoroughness. In Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, the Land Transport Rule, Driver Licensing 2007, specifically Part 3 concerning practical driving tests, mandates that examiners assess a candidate's ability to drive safely and competently in a variety of conditions. This scenario is professionally challenging because the examiner must make a judgment call under time pressure, potentially impacting a candidate's livelihood and public safety. The risk of a false positive, passing an unsafe driver, or a false negative, failing a competent driver, is significant. The best approach involves a systematic and documented evaluation of the candidate's performance against the official assessment criteria, prioritizing safety and adherence to road rules. This means meticulously recording observations of the candidate's driving, including any errors or areas of concern, and then making a decision based on the cumulative evidence. The Land Transport Rule requires that a candidate demonstrates proficiency in a range of skills, and a failure to do so, even if minor, must be noted and considered in the overall assessment. The examiner's professional responsibility is to ensure the candidate meets the minimum standard for a driver's license, thereby upholding public safety on Hawke's Bay roads. An approach that overlooks a significant error due to a desire to complete the test quickly is professionally unacceptable. This directly contravenes the spirit and letter of the Land Transport Rule, which emphasizes a comprehensive assessment of driving competency. Failing to document or adequately address a clear breach of road rules, such as failing to yield at an intersection, undermines the integrity of the licensing process and poses a direct risk to other road users. Another unacceptable approach is to pass a candidate based on a subjective feeling of their overall good driving, without concrete evidence of adherence to all required competencies. Assessment must be objective and based on observable behaviors and adherence to traffic laws as outlined in the Land Transport Rule. Personal impressions, while potentially influenced by a candidate's demeanor, are not a substitute for a rigorous evaluation of their driving skills and knowledge. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the number of minor errors, rather than the severity and potential impact of those errors, is also flawed. While the Land Transport Rule outlines criteria for passing, the examiner must exercise professional judgment to determine if a series of minor errors indicates a fundamental lack of competency or a momentary lapse. However, a significant error that compromises safety, regardless of the number of other minor errors, must be treated with utmost seriousness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to regulatory requirements, objective assessment of performance against defined criteria, and a commitment to public safety. This involves active listening, meticulous observation, accurate documentation, and a clear understanding of the consequences of their decisions. When faced with ambiguity, seeking clarification or adhering to the strictest interpretation of the rules that ensure safety is paramount. Question 10. Governance review demonstrates that the Hawke's Bay Regional Council's driver's license renewal process is bogged down by manual data entry, leading to an average processing time of 20 minutes per application and a daily output of 120 renewals. Staff costs are estimated at $35 per hour. If the Council considers implementing a new digital system that could reduce the average processing time to 7 minutes per application and increase daily output to 250 renewals, what is the potential daily saving in staff processing costs, assuming the same hourly rate? Option A. The potential daily saving in staff processing costs is approximately $175.00. Option B. The potential daily saving in staff processing costs is approximately $70.00. Option C. The potential daily saving in staff processing costs is approximately $105.00. Option D. The potential daily saving in staff processing costs is approximately $210.00. Correct answer is C. The potential daily saving in staff processing costs is approximately $105.00. Explanation. Governance review demonstrates that the Hawke's Bay Regional Council is experiencing significant delays in processing driver's license renewals due to an inefficient manual system. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts public service delivery, potentially leading to frustration and non-compliance among drivers. The Council must balance the need for accuracy and security with the demand for timely service. Careful judgment is required to implement a solution that is both effective and compliant with New Zealand's Land Transport Act 1998 and associated regulations. The correct approach involves a data-driven analysis of the current process to identify bottlenecks and quantify the impact of delays. This includes calculating the average processing time per application, the number of applications processed per day, and the cost associated with manual processing versus potential automation. For instance, if the current manual system processes 150 applications per day with an average processing time of 15 minutes per application, and the cost per hour for staff is $30, the daily staff cost for processing is /frac 150 text applications 1 text day times /frac 15 text minutes 1 text application times /frac 1 text hour 60 text minutes times /frac $31 text hour equals $112. 50 If a new digital system could reduce the average processing time to 5 minutes per application and process 300 applications per day, the daily staff cost for processing would be /frac 300 text applications 1 text day times /frac 5 text minutes 1 text application times /frac 1 text hour 60 text minutes times /frac $31 text hour equals $75. 00 This approach is correct because it aligns with principles of good governance and public administration, aiming for efficiency and value for money, as mandated by the Local Government Act 2002, which requires local authorities to conduct their business in an efficient and effective manner. It also ensures that any proposed changes are justifiable based on measurable improvements and potential cost savings, while maintaining the integrity of the licensing system, as required by the Land Transport Act 1998. An incorrect approach would be to immediately invest in the most expensive, cutting-edge digital system without a thorough analysis of current inefficiencies and the specific needs of the Hawke's Bay region. This fails to demonstrate due diligence and responsible use of public funds, potentially leading to an over-engineered or unsuitable solution. Another incorrect approach would be to simply hire more staff to manage the existing manual system. While this might temporarily reduce delays, it does not address the root cause of inefficiency and is not a sustainable or cost-effective long-term solution, failing to meet the efficiency requirements of the Local Government Act 2002. A further incorrect approach would be to outsource the entire processing function to a third party without establishing clear performance metrics and oversight mechanisms. This could compromise data security and public trust, and may not be cost-effective if not managed properly, potentially violating the Council's duty of care under New Zealand law. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive assessment of the current state, including process mapping and performance measurement. This should be followed by identifying potential solutions, evaluating them against defined criteria, cost, efficiency, compliance, security, user experience, and conducting a cost-benefit analysis. Pilot testing and stakeholder consultation are crucial steps before full implementation. Question 11. Stakeholder feedback indicates a desire to reduce waiting times for driver testing in Hawke's Bay. Considering the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which approach to optimizing the testing process would best balance efficiency with the imperative to ensure driver competency and road safety. Option A. Implement changes to the testing process based on suggestions from a few experienced testing officers without formal data collection or analysis. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the current testing procedures, analyze data on test duration and failure points, and implement targeted improvements to route efficiency and clarity of instructions, ensuring all assessment criteria from the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017 are fully met. Option C. Eliminate certain observation points within the test that are perceived as less critical to reduce the overall time spent assessing each candidate. Option D. Shorten the duration of the practical driving test by approximately 25% to allow for more appointments within the same operational hours. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the current testing procedures, analyze data on test duration and failure points, and implement targeted improvements to route efficiency and clarity of instructions, ensuring all assessment criteria from the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 2017 are fully met. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for efficient driver testing with the fundamental obligation to ensure all drivers meet the required safety standards for Hawke's Bay roads. The pressure to reduce wait times, while a valid stakeholder concern, must not compromise the integrity and safety outcomes of the licensing process. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement improvements that enhance efficiency without sacrificing thoroughness or adherence to the land transport, driver licensing. Rule 2017. Correct approach analysis. The approach that represents best professional practice involves systematically reviewing the current testing process to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then implementing targeted improvements that do not compromise the assessment of essential driving skills. This includes analyzing data on test duration, pass rates, and common reasons for failure, and consulting with testing officers to gather practical insights. Improvements might involve optimizing the route for efficiency, ensuring clear instructions are given, or refining the assessment criteria for clarity, all while strictly adhering to the requirements of the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 2017. This approach is correct because it prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance by focusing on process optimization that supports, rather than undermines, the core purpose of the driver licensing test. It directly addresses stakeholder feedback by seeking to improve efficiency in a manner that is consistent with legal obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves significantly shortening the duration of the practical driving test to accommodate more applicants per day. This is professionally unacceptable because it risks failing to adequately assess critical driving competencies as mandated by the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 2017, potentially leading to the licensing of unsafe drivers and increasing risks on Hawke's Bay roads. Another incorrect approach is to reduce the number of assessment criteria or the depth of observation during the test to speed up the process. This is ethically and regulatorily flawed as it directly contravenes the spirit and letter of the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 2017, which specifies the competencies that must be demonstrated for a license. It prioritizes speed over safety and competence. A further incorrect approach is to implement changes based solely on anecdotal evidence from a small group of testers without a systematic review or data analysis. This is unprofessional because it lacks a robust foundation for decision-making and could lead to ineffective or even detrimental changes that do not genuinely improve the process or address the root causes of any perceived inefficiencies, while still potentially impacting compliance with the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 2017. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a data-driven and systematic approach to process optimization. This involves 1. Clearly defining the problem and desired outcomes, e.g., reducing wait times while maintaining safety standards. 2. Gathering comprehensive data and stakeholder feedback. 3. Analyzing the current process to identify specific areas for improvement. 4. Developing and piloting potential solutions that are compliant with all relevant regulations, such as the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 2017. 5. Evaluating the effectiveness of implemented changes and making further adjustments as needed. This iterative process ensures that improvements are evidence-based, effective, and ethically sound. Question 12. The performance metrics show a concerning trend of increased driver errors during adverse weather conditions on Hawke's Bay roads. Considering the requirements of the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999, which of the following strategies would best address this issue by optimizing the driver testing process for competency in challenging weather? Option A. Institute an automatic failure for any driver who experiences any adverse weather event during their practical driving test, irrespective of their demonstrated control. Option B. Temporarily halt all practical driving tests conducted by the Hawke's Bay Testing Center whenever adverse weather is forecast or present. Option C. Launch a broad public awareness campaign across Hawke's Bay about the dangers of driving in bad weather, without altering the current testing protocols. Option D. Enhance the Hawke's Bay Testing Center's procedures and examiner training to specifically assess and evaluate driver performance in adverse weather conditions, updating relevant testing manuals accordingly. The correct answer is D. Enhance the Hawke's Bay Testing Center's procedures and examiner training to specifically assess and evaluate driver performance in adverse weather conditions, updating relevant testing manuals accordingly. Explanation: the performance metrics show a consistent increase in driver error rates during adverse weather conditions on Hawke's Bay roads. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to improve road safety with the practical constraints of driver training resources and the potential for driver anxiety. Careful judgment is required to implement effective solutions that are both compliant with New Zealand's land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999, and promote responsible driving behavior without unduly penalizing drivers. The best approach involves a targeted review and enhancement of the existing driver testing procedures, specifically for adverse weather conditions. This includes updating the Hawke's Bay Testing Center's manual to include detailed guidance on assessing driver competency in rain, fog, and high winds, and ensuring examiners are adequately trained to observe and evaluate these specific skills. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the identified performance gap by focusing on observable behaviors and skills relevant to the testing environment, aligning with the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999 objective of ensuring drivers are competent and safe. It also promotes a proactive and adaptive approach to driver licensing, ensuring that the testing reflects real-world driving challenges. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the frequency of general driver education campaigns without specific links to the testing process is insufficient. While education is valuable, it does not directly address the competency assessment aspect required by the licensing framework. This fails to ensure that drivers are demonstrably capable of handling adverse conditions at the point of licensing. Implementing a policy to automatically fail any driver who encounters any adverse weather during their test, regardless of their demonstrated control and decision-making, is overly punitive and not aligned with the principles of assessing competency. The land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999 emphasizes assessing a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely, not penalizing them for unavoidable environmental factors if they can still demonstrate control. This approach risks creating unnecessary barriers to licensing and does not reflect a nuanced assessment of driving skill. A strategy that involves suspending all driving tests during periods of adverse weather is impractical and would significantly impede the licensing process. The goal is to assess drivers' ability to handle these conditions, not to avoid them entirely. This approach would fail to equip new drivers with the skills and confidence to drive safely when conditions inevitably change. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data analysis, performance metrics, identifies specific problem areas, adverse weather driving errors, consults relevant regulations, land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999, and then develops targeted, practical, and compliant solutions. This involves considering the effectiveness, fairness, and feasibility of proposed interventions, prioritizing those that directly enhance the assessment of driver competency in challenging, real-world scenarios. Question 13. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for the Hawke's Bay driver's test appears confident and navigates familiar sections of the testing route with ease. However, the examiner notices a pattern of slightly delayed reactions when encountering unexpected minor hazards, such as a pedestrian stepping onto the curb or a cyclist merging into traffic. Considering the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 2017, which approach best ensures a responsible and compliant assessment of this candidate's readiness for the road. Option A. Immediately fail the candidate based on the initial observation of delayed reactions, without further observation or consideration of their performance in other critical driving areas. Option B. Continue the assessment, meticulously observing and documenting the candidate's responses to all unexpected events and decision-making processes, even if it means slightly extending the test duration to gather sufficient evidence of their hazard perception and reaction times. Option C. Overlook the delayed reactions, attributing them to minor nervousness, and proceed with the standard assessment, focusing on the candidate's ability to follow instructions and maintain lane discipline. Option D. Conclude the test early, assuming the candidate's overall confidence and familiarity with the route indicates sufficient competence, and focus on completing the remaining scheduled assessments for the day. The correct answer is B. Continue the assessment, meticulously observing and documenting the candidate's responses to all unexpected events and decision-making processes, even if it means slightly extending the test duration to gather sufficient evidence of their hazard perception and reaction times. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in driver testing, balancing efficiency with thoroughness. The Hawke's Bay Driver's Test, governed by New Zealand's Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, emphasizes ensuring all candidates demonstrate the necessary competencies for safe driving. This scenario is professionally challenging because the examiner must adhere to strict time constraints while ensuring no critical safety aspects are overlooked. A rushed assessment risks certifying an unsafe driver, while an overly prolonged one can create logistical issues and frustration. Careful judgment is required to identify and address potential risks efficiently. The best approach involves a systematic and observant evaluation of the candidate's driving skills against the established criteria within the Hawke's Bay testing environment. This means actively looking for evidence of the candidate's ability to manage risks, adhere to road rules, and demonstrate defensive driving techniques throughout the entire test duration. The regulatory framework, specifically the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, mandates that examiners assess a driver's competence to operate a vehicle safely. This approach ensures that the assessment is comprehensive, objective, and directly addresses the requirements for obtaining a driver's license in New Zealand, prioritizing public safety. An approach that focuses solely on completing the test within the allocated time, without adequately observing the candidate's decision-making in varied traffic conditions, is professionally unacceptable. It fails to meet the regulatory requirement of assessing overall competence and could lead to the licensing of drivers who are not truly prepared for the complexities of real-world driving. Another unacceptable approach is to allow personal biases or assumptions about the candidate's experience to influence the assessment. The Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, requires an objective evaluation based on observable performance, not on preconceived notions. This can lead to inconsistent and unfair assessments. Finally, an approach that involves deviating significantly from the standardized testing route or criteria without a clear, documented safety reason is also professionally unsound. This undermines the integrity and comparability of the testing process across different candidates and examiners, potentially contravening the spirit of the regulations designed to ensure a consistent standard of driver competency. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to regulatory requirements, objective observation, and a commitment to public safety. This involves understanding the specific criteria of the Hawke's Bay Driver's Test, actively seeking evidence of competence throughout the assessment, and making judgments based solely on observed performance against those criteria. When in doubt, it is always better to err on the side of caution and conduct a more thorough observation rather than risk certifying an unsafe driver. Question 14. Market research demonstrates a growing demand for driver testing services in Hawke's Bay, leading to extended waiting times for prospective drivers. To address this, what is the most appropriate strategy for optimizing the driver testing process while strictly adhering to the Hawke's Bay Land Transport Authority's regulations? Option A. Increase the number of daily tests conducted by examiners by scheduling them back-to-back with minimal breaks to maximize examiner utilization and throughput. Option B. Introduce automated components into the practical driving assessment to replace human examiner judgment for certain aspects of the test, thereby speeding up the evaluation process. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of current testing procedures to identify and eliminate non-essential steps, streamline route planning for practical tests, and implement a more efficient scheduling system, ensuring all core competencies are still rigorously assessed. Option D. Shorten the duration of practical driving tests by reducing the number of required maneuvers and simplifying the assessment criteria to process more candidates within the same time frame. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of current testing procedures to identify and eliminate non-essential steps, streamline route planning for practical tests, and implement a more efficient scheduling system, ensuring all core competencies are still rigorously assessed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for efficient driver testing with the paramount importance of ensuring all candidates meet the required safety standards for operating a vehicle on Hawke's Bay roads. The pressure to reduce wait times can create a temptation to cut corners, which directly conflicts with the regulatory mandate to uphold public safety. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement process improvements that enhance efficiency without compromising the integrity or thoroughness of the testing process. Correct approach analysis. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a systematic review of the current testing process to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, followed by the implementation of targeted improvements that do not compromise the assessment of essential driving skills. This includes analyzing data on test duration, common failure points, and candidate feedback to pinpoint areas for optimization. For instance, refining the route planning for practical tests to minimize travel time between assessment points, or improving the scheduling system to better allocate examiner resources, are examples of such improvements. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the goal of process optimization by seeking to make the testing more efficient while adhering strictly to the requirements of the Hawke's Bay Land Transport Authority's driver licensing regulation, which prioritize safety and competence. It ensures that any changes made are data-driven and aimed at improving the overall candidate experience and examiner workflow without reducing the scope or rigor of the assessment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves reducing the duration of the practical driving test by shortening the route or omitting certain maneuvers. This is professionally unacceptable because it directly violates the regulatory requirement to assess a comprehensive range of driving skills necessary for safe operation on Hawke's Bay roads. Such a reduction could lead to less competent drivers being licensed, thereby increasing the risk of accidents and contravening the fundamental purpose of the driver testing regime. Another incorrect approach is to increase the number of candidates tested per day by assigning examiners to conduct tests back-to-back with minimal breaks. While this might appear to increase throughput, it fails to account for examiner fatigue, which can lead to reduced concentration and an increased likelihood of errors in assessment. This compromises the fairness and accuracy of the testing process and could indirectly lead to safety concerns, as examiners might miss critical errors made by candidates due to exhaustion. A further incorrect approach is to automate parts of the practical driving assessment without ensuring that the automated system can accurately and reliably evaluate all the nuanced aspects of driver judgment and situational awareness that a human examiner can. The regulations require a human element in assessing a driver's ability to react to unpredictable situations, which is difficult to replicate fully with current automation. This could lead to an inaccurate assessment of a candidate's readiness to drive safely. Professional reasoning. Professionals in driver testing must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance above all else. When considering process optimization, the first step should always be to understand the core objectives of the testing process as defined by the relevant regulatory body, in this case, the Hawke's Bay Land Transport Authority. Any proposed changes must be evaluated against these objectives, the particular focus on how they impact the assessment of driver competence and public safety. Data analysis should guide the identification of inefficiencies, and proposed solutions must be tested for their impact on the quality and integrity of the assessment. A continuous improvement mindset, coupled with a strong ethical compass, is essential to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of safety and regulatory adherence. Question 15. The assessment process reveals that a candidate for a Hawke's Bay driver's license has made several minor driving errors, such as a slight hesitation at an intersection and a momentary lapse in checking a blind spot, but has not created any hazardous situations or directly endangered other road users. Considering the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, which approach to evaluating this candidate's performance is most professionally appropriate. Option A. Fail the candidate based on the accumulation of a specific number of minor errors, regardless of whether these errors posed a significant safety risk. Option B. Evaluate the candidate's overall performance, considering the impact of observed errors on safety and control, and determine if the candidate demonstrates the competence required for safe driving. Even with minor imperfections, Option C. Focus on the candidate's adherence to the precise sequence of checks and observations, failing them for any deviation, even if the overall driving was safe and controlled. Option D. passed the candidate immediately, as no hazardous situations were created, thereby prioritizing assessment efficiency. The correct answer is B. Evaluate the candidate's overall performance, considering the impact of observed errors on safety and control, and determine if the candidate demonstrates the competence required for safe driving, even with minor imperfections. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in driver testing, balancing efficiency with thoroughness. The Hawke's Bay Driver's Test, governed by New Zealand's Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017, mandates a comprehensive evaluation of a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely and competently. This scenario is professionally challenging because the examiner must adhere to strict procedural guidelines while also making nuanced judgments about a candidate's performance, particularly when minor errors occur. The pressure to process candidates efficiently can conflict with the ethical and regulatory imperative to ensure only safe drivers are licensed. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between minor lapses that do not compromise safety and more serious indicators of potential risk. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a systematic review of the candidate's performance against the established criteria, focusing on the impact of any observed errors on overall safety. This means acknowledging any deviations from the expected standard, but critically assessing whether these deviations created a hazardous situation or demonstrated a fundamental lack of understanding or control. For instance, a momentary hesitation at an intersection that does not impede traffic flow or create a risk is different from a failure to yield, which directly impacts safety. The Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017 emphasizes the assessment of a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely and competently, and this approach directly aligns with that objective by prioritizing safety outcomes over mere procedural adherence to a perfect driving record. It requires the examiner to apply professional judgment within the framework of the rules, ensuring that the assessment is both fair and effective in its purpose of public safety. An approach that focuses solely on the number of minor errors, irrespective of their impact on safety, is professionally unacceptable. While the rules outline expected driving standards, the ultimate goal is safe operation. Accumulating a certain number of minor infractions, without any of them escalating to a dangerous situation, does not necessarily indicate an unsafe driver. This approach fails to apply the necessary professional judgment to differentiate between minor imperfections and genuine safety risks, potentially leading to the failure of competent drivers or, conversely, the licensing of those who may pose a risk due to more serious underlying issues. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to overlook errors that, while seemingly minor in isolation, collectively demonstrate a pattern of unsafe driving or a lack of situational awareness. For example, a series of small hesitations, poor lane positioning, or inadequate mirror checks, even if none individually cause an immediate hazard, can indicate a driver who is not fully in control or aware of their surroundings. This approach neglects the cumulative effect of driving behaviors and fails to uphold the comprehensive safety assessment required by the regulations. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of assessment over accuracy and thoroughness is ethically and regulatorily unsound. The purpose of the driver licensing process is to ensure public safety on the roads. Rushing through an assessment to process more candidates quickly undermines this core objective, as it increases the likelihood of errors in judgment and the potential for unsafe drivers to be licensed. This approach directly contravenes the spirit and intent of the Land Transport, Driver Licensing, Rule 2017. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the regulatory requirements and the specific assessment criteria. This should be followed by objective observation and recording of the candidate's performance. Crucially, the framework must incorporate a stage for critical analysis, where observed behaviors are evaluated against the primary objective of safe driving. This involves considering the context of each action, its potential consequences, and whether it indicates a systemic issue or a minor, inconsequential lapse. Ethical considerations, particularly the duty to public safety, must be paramount throughout the decision-making process. Question 16. In Hawke's Bay, during a practical driver licensing assessment, a testing officer observes a candidate demonstrating proficient vehicle control and adherence to most road rules. However, the candidate appears slightly hesitant at a complex intersection, taking a few extra seconds to proceed when it is safe. The The testing officer, aware of the need to maintain a testing schedule, considers how to best conclude the assessment while ensuring all regulatory requirements are met. Option A. Continue the assessment as planned, meticulously observing and documenting the candidate's performance at the intersection and all subsequent maneuvers against the established criteria in the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999, ensuring a comprehensive evaluation of their hazard perception and decision-making. Option B. Make a subjective judgment based on the candidate's overall demeanor and perceived confidence, allowing for a more lenient interpretation of the hesitation at the intersection. Option C. Focus primarily on the candidate's ability to navigate the remainder of the planned route without significant incident, overlooking the minor hesitation at the intersection as a non-critical deviation. Option D. Expedite the remainder of the test by slightly shortening the duration of observation at less critical points, assuming the candidate's overall performance indicates they are likely to pass. The correct answer is A. Continue the assessment as planned, meticulously observing and documenting the candidate's performance at the intersection and all subsequent maneuvers against the established criteria in the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999, ensuring a comprehensive evaluation of their hazard perception and decision-making. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in driver testing, balancing efficiency with thoroughness. The Hawke's Bay Driver's Test, governed by New Zealand's land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999, mandates a comprehensive evaluation of a driver's ability to operate a vehicle safely and competently. This scenario is professionally challenging because the testing officer must adhere to strict procedural guidelines while also making nuanced judgments about a candidate's performance, ensuring public safety without being unduly lenient or overly harsh. Pressure to process candidates efficiently can sometimes conflict with the imperative to conduct a complete and accurate assessment. The best approach involves a systematic and objective evaluation of all required competencies, as outlined in the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999, and associated NZTA guidelines. This means meticulously observing the candidate's adherence to road rules, their vehicle control skills, hazard perception, and decision-making throughout the entire test duration. The testing officer must ensure that every aspect of the driving task is assessed against the established criteria, documenting any deviations or areas of concern accurately. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the regulatory requirement to ensure that only drivers who meet the prescribed standards of safety and competence are licensed, thereby upholding public safety on Hawke's Bay roads. It is ethically sound as it treats all candidates fairly by applying the same objective standards. An approach that prioritizes speed by skipping certain observation points or abbreviating the assessment of specific maneuvers is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a comprehensive evaluation and could result in the licensing of an unsafe driver, directly contravening the purpose of the driver licensing regime and potentially leading to accidents. Another unacceptable approach is to allow personal biases or subjective interpretations to influence the assessment, such as being overly lenient on a candidate who appears friendly or overly critical due to a minor, unrelated personal issue. This violates the ethical principle of fairness and impartiality, and it undermines the integrity of the testing process. The land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999 emphasizes objective assessment based on observable performance. Furthermore, an approach that focuses solely on the candidate's ability to pass a specific route, without assessing their general hazard perception and defensive driving skills in varied situations, is also flawed. The test is designed to evaluate a driver's overall capability, not just their familiarity with a particular course. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to regulatory standards and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific requirements of the land transport, driver licensing, Rule 1999, and NZTA guidelines. 2. Maintaining strict objectivity and impartiality throughout the assessment. 3. Documenting all observations accurately and comprehensively. 4. Recognizing and mitigating potential personal biases. 5. Prioritizing public safety above all other considerations, including efficiency. Question 17. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a more streamlined approach to driving instruction in Hawke's Bay could reduce lesson times, considering the NZTA requirements for safe and competent drivers, which instructional strategy best balances efficiency with comprehensive skill development? Option A. Systematically progressing through all NZTA-required competencies, integrating hazard perception and defensive driving techniques into practical application throughout the syllabus. Option B. Prioritizing speed and lesson completion by covering only the most basic road rules and frequently tested maneuvers, assuming students will learn advanced skills independently. Option C. Focusing exclusively on skills that are heavily weighted in the practical driving test, such as parking and basic navigation, while minimizing instruction on rural or adverse weather driving. Option D. Allowing students to guide the lesson content based on their perceived strengths and preferences, skipping any topics they find challenging or less relevant. Correct answer is A. Systematically progressing through all NZTA-required competencies, integrating hazard perception and defensive driving techniques into practical application throughout the syllabus. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for driving instructors in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, where balancing efficiency with thoroughness is crucial. The pressure to complete lessons within a set time frame, potentially influenced by student availability or instructor scheduling, can lead to shortcuts. However, the paramount concern in driver training is safety and competence, which requires a structured and comprehensive approach to instruction, adhering to the standards set by the New Zealand Transport Agency, NZTA. Failing to adequately cover all essential aspects of safe driving can have serious consequences, including increased risk of accidents and failure to pass the practical driving test. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves systematically covering all required competencies as outlined in the NZTA driver licensing system. This means ensuring that each lesson builds upon previous knowledge and skills, with a clear progression through the syllabus. For instance, a lesson focusing on hazard perception should not be rushed or skipped, even if a student appears confident. Instead, it should be integrated with practical application, such as identifying potential dangers on the road and demonstrating appropriate responses. This approach ensures that the student develops a holistic understanding of safe driving, meeting the standards expected for a New Zealand driver's license. This aligns with the NZTA emphasis on developing competent and safe drivers, not just those who can pass a test through rote memorization or superficial understanding. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to prioritize speed and completion over depth of understanding. This might involve glossing over complex topics like defensive driving techniques or emergency maneuvers, assuming the student will pick them up implicitly or that they are less critical than basic road rules. This fails to meet the NZTA requirement for comprehensive driver education and significantly compromises the student's safety and preparedness for real-world driving. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the skills that are most frequently tested in the practical driving assessment, neglecting other important aspects of safe driving. For example, an instructor might heavily drill parking maneuvers but spend minimal time on rural road driving or adverse weather conditions. This creates a driver who may pass the test but lacks the broader skills necessary to navigate diverse and challenging driving environments safely, which is a failure of professional responsibility and against the spirit of the NZTA licensing objectives. A third incorrect approach is to allow students to dictate the lesson's content based on their perceived strengths or preferences, rather than following a structured syllabus. While student input is valuable, the instructor's role is to guide the learning process and ensure all critical areas are covered. Allowing a student to avoid challenging topics or skip essential skill development undermines the instructor's expertise and the integrity of the training program, potentially leading to gaps in competence that could be dangerous. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Hawke's Bay, like all driving instructors in New Zealand, must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes student safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the NZTA comprehensive syllabus and assessment criteria thoroughly. 2. Planning lessons that systematically address all required competencies, ensuring a logical progression of skills. 3. Continuously assessing student understanding and skill acquisition, providing targeted feedback and remedial instruction where needed. 4. Resisting pressure to compromise on training quality for the sake of speed or convenience, recognizing that the long-term safety of the public is at stake. 5. Maintaining professional judgment to ensure all essential aspects of safe driving are covered, regardless of student preference or perceived ease of instruction. Question 18. The monitoring system demonstrates an intermittent and unpredictable fluctuation in its readings for a specific section of road within Hawke's Bay. This section is known for moderate traffic volume and is frequently used by cyclists. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the road operator? Option A. Attempt a remote reset of the monitoring system and continue operations if the anomaly ceases. Option B. Immediately suspend operations in the affected road section and initiate a full diagnostic investigation of the monitoring system. Option C. Continue operations but log the anomaly for review during the next scheduled maintenance cycle. Option D. Increase the frequency of manual patrols in the affected section while continuing normal operations. Correct answer is B. Immediately suspend operations in the affected road section and initiate a full diagnostic investigation of the monitoring system. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential lapse in proactive safety management, which is a critical aspect of road safety regulations in Hawke's Bay. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate judgment to balance operational efficiency with the paramount importance of public safety. A failure to act decisively could lead to preventable accidents, contravening the spirit and letter of the Land Transport, Road User, Rule 2004, and the Hawke's Bay Regional Council's Road Safety Strategy. The best approach involves immediate, decisive action to address the identified anomaly. This means halting operations in the affected zone and initiating a thorough investigation to determine the root cause of the system's erratic behavior. This aligns with the regulatory expectation for operators to maintain their equipment and systems to a standard that ensures public safety. The ethical imperative to protect lives and prevent harm dictates that any potential safety risk, however minor it may initially appear, must be investigated thoroughly before normal operations resume. This proactive stance is fundamental to responsible road user behavior and operator accountability. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the anomaly as a minor glitch and continue operations. This disregards the potential for unforeseen consequences and violates the principle of duty of care owed to all road users. Such inaction could be interpreted as negligence, especially if an incident were to occur. Another incorrect approach is to attempt a quick, superficial fix without a comprehensive diagnostic. This prioritizes expediency over thoroughness and fails to address the underlying issue, leaving the system vulnerable to further malfunction. This also falls short of the regulatory requirement for robust maintenance and operational integrity. Professionals should employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves identifying potential hazards, the monitoring system anomaly, assessing the likelihood and severity of harm, potential accidents, and implementing controls to mitigate those risks, halting operations and investigating. The guiding principle should always be the preservation of public safety, even if it means temporary disruption to services. Question 19. During the evaluation of a driver's performance on the Hawke's Bay driver's test, a scenario arises where the driver approaches a pedestrian crossing with a pedestrian waiting at the curb and a cyclist approaching from the opposite direction. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates an optimized process for hazard perception and response according to New Zealand road safety guidelines? Option A. The driver accelerates slightly to pass the pedestrian crossing quickly before the pedestrian or cyclist can become a hazard. Option B. The driver immediately brakes sharply to a complete stop well before the pedestrian crossing, regardless of the pedestrian's actions or the cyclist's proximity. Option C. The driver maintains their current speed and position, observing the pedestrian and cyclist, and prepares to slow down or stop only if the pedestrian steps onto the crossing or the cyclist deviates from their path. Option D. The driver observes the pedestrian and cyclist and proactively reduces speed and adjusts their position slightly to create a safe buffer, anticipating that the pedestrian may step out or the cyclist may need space, and is prepared to stop if necessary. The correct answer is C. The driver maintains their current speed and position, observing the pedestrian and cyclist, and prepares to slow down or stop only if the pedestrian steps onto the crossing or the cyclist deviates from their path. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver undergoing a Hawke's Bay driver's test by requiring them to demonstrate an understanding of safe driving practices in varying conditions, specifically focusing on process optimization for hazard perception and response. The challenge lies in applying theoretical knowledge to a practical, real-time situation, where immediate and correct judgment is paramount for safety and successful test completion. The driver must not only identify potential hazards, but also optimize their response to mitigate risks effectively, adhering to the specific road rules and expectations of the Hawke's Bay region. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic and proactive observation of the driving environment, anticipating potential hazards before they fully materialize. This includes actively scanning for changes in road conditions, traffic flow, and the behavior of other road users. Upon identifying a potential hazard, such as a pedestrian near a crossing or a vehicle signaling a turn, the driver should immediately and smoothly adjust their speed and position to create a safe buffer, without causing undue disruption to other traffic. This aligns with the core principles of defensive driving and the requirements of the Hawke's Bay driver's test, which emphasizes safe and considerate road use. The regulatory framework for driver licensing in New Zealand, which governs Hawke's Bay, mandates that drivers must operate their vehicles in a manner that avoids danger to themselves and others, and this proactive hazard management is central to fulfilling that obligation. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that involves reacting only when a hazard is imminent, such as braking sharply only when a pedestrian is directly in front of the vehicle, is a failure to optimize hazard perception. This reactive approach increases the risk of a collision and demonstrates a lack of foresight, which is contrary to the safe driving standards expected in Hawke's Bay. It also fails to adhere to the principle of maintaining a safe following distance and anticipating the actions of others. Another incorrect approach is to maintain a constant, high speed regardless of changing road or traffic conditions, assuming other road users will adapt. This demonstrates a disregard for the dynamic nature of driving and the need for situational awareness. It fails to optimize the driving process by not adjusting to potential risks, potentially leading to dangerous situations, and a failure to meet the test requirements for safe and responsible driving. Finally, an approach that involves making sudden, jerky movements or abrupt braking when a hazard is perceived, even if it avoids an immediate collision, is also unacceptable. While it might address the immediate threat, it creates new hazards for following vehicles and indicates a lack of smooth control and anticipation, which are key components of optimized driving processes. This approach does not demonstrate the calm and controlled decision-making expected of a licensed driver. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a continuous cycle of observation, anticipation, and controlled action. This involves actively scanning the environment, identifying potential risks, assessing their severity, and planning a safe response well in advance. When faced with a driving test scenario, the driver should mentally rehearse potential hazards and their appropriate responses, always prioritizing safety and adherence to road rules. The decision-making process should be guided by the principle of see and be seen, and anticipate and avoid. Question 20. A driver in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, is en route to a critical appointment. Their GPS indicates the original route will take 45 minutes, covering 50 km at an average speed of 67 km/h. An alternative route, appearing shorter on the map, is 40 km long. If the driver can maintain an average speed of 55 km/h on this alternative route, what is the minimum time saving in minutes required for this alternative route to be considered a potentially better option, assuming the primary goal is to arrive as close to the appointment time as possible without compromising safety? Option A. The alternative route must save at least 20 minutes compared to the original route. Option B. The alternative route must save at least 15 minutes compared to the original route. Option C. The alternative route must save at least 9 minutes compared to the original route. Option D. The alternative route must save at least 5 minutes compared to the original route. The correct answer is C. The alternative route must save at least 9 minutes compared to the original route. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate safety concerns with efficient route planning under time pressure. The driver must make a critical decision about route deviation that impacts both their arrival time and the potential for encountering hazardous conditions, all while adhering to the principles of safe driving as mandated by the Hawke's Bay region's road rules and driver licensing requirements. The core challenge lies in quantifying the risk versus reward of different routes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the estimated time of arrival (ETA) for both the original route and the alternative route, considering the additional distance and average speed. This approach prioritizes a data-driven decision. The driver should calculate the time saved by the alternative route by subtracting the original ETA from the alternative ETA. If the time saved is significant enough to justify the potential increased risk, e.g., if the original route is known to be significantly delayed, and the alternative route's conditions are assessed as reasonably safe, then choosing the alternative route is professionally sound. This aligns with the Hawke's Bay driver licensing requirements, which emphasize making safe and informed decisions. Specifically, the Land Transport Road User, Rule 2004, New Zealand, requires drivers to operate their vehicles in a manner that does not endanger themselves or others, which includes making reasonable assessments of road conditions and travel times. A driver must consider all available information to make the safest and most efficient choice. Incorrect approach is analysis. Choosing the original route without considering the potential time savings of the alternative route is professionally deficient because it ignores an opportunity for efficiency that might be crucial for meeting a commitment, without a clear safety justification for doing so. It fails to demonstrate proactive route management. Opting for the alternative route solely because it appears shorter on a map, without calculating the actual time difference or assessing the road conditions, is a significant regulatory failure. This approach is based on incomplete information and could lead to unforeseen hazards or delays, violating the principle of safe and informed driving. Relying on a gut feeling or a vague recollection of the alternative route's condition, without any objective assessment or calculation, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to apply logical reasoning to a driving decision, which is contrary to the expectations of a licensed driver in Hawke's Bay. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process. First, gather all relevant information: current location, destination, original route ETA, alternative route distance and estimated speed, and any known conditions on either route. Second, perform objective calculations to quantify the potential benefits, time saved, and risks unknown conditions, increased distance. Third, weigh these factors against the primary objective of safe driving. If the calculated benefits of an alternative route are substantial and the risks are manageable and assessed as acceptable, then deviating is justified. If the benefits are marginal or the risks are high, sticking to the original route, even if slower, is the more professional choice. This structured approach ensures decisions are based on evidence and sound judgment, rather than impulse or incomplete data.